So, good afternoon, good evening, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me here today on this live stream. I have a very special guest. I have Claire M. Lopez. She is a very highly experienced expert on jihad, terrorism, and Sharia. She has an extensive career, and I'm not going to go through all of the highlights because there's just so much in her multi-decade career. But she is currently the founder and president of Lopez Liberty LLC, where she works to alert Americans to national security threats, including those from the Muslim Brotherhood. And she has a deep and extensive degree of experience in national security, counterterrorism, and international relations. And she has worked in the CIA. She's been a former career operations officer. And also, she was professor at the Center for Counterintelligence and Security Studies. And yeah, she's also worked on issues regarding Iran. So yeah, without me going, all of this is in the description, so you're welcome to have a look at that. And finally, I learned about her originally from reading the book Sharia: The Threat to America, and exercising competitive analysis. So the report of Team B2. And also she has she's been co-author of multiple books. Would that be correct?
Yes, I have never yet written one completely of my own. I must get to that.
Right. And then also recently, she has the Star Spangled Shariah, the rise of America's first Muslim Brotherhood party, and another on, I believe this is on how the FBI, the CIA, and other intelligence groups had all references, all discussion of Sharia and Islam scrubbed from the lexicon, which I found really disturbing when I first learned about that. I think from Frank Gaffney. So yeah, over to you, Claire.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Lloyd, for having me. Glad to join you in this podcast today. And the topic could not be more timely as we face, uh, you know, uh, campus chaos at home right here in the United States. Sponsored by, backed and supported by Muslim Brotherhood front groups like Students for Justice in Palestine and the Muslim Students Association, at a time also when the Middle East is in chaos as well, once again. And this again, you were looking at the Hamas, Islamic Jihad terror organizations assault, continual assault, but certainly the October 7, 2023 Shabbat massacre attack against
Yeah.
Israel, together with its partner in the Gaza Strip, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, participated in that, as did thousands of ordinary, everyday Gazan civilians. All of this, of course, backed, sponsored by both Qatar, a Sunni regime in the Middle East, and the regime of Iran.
Yeah, it's interesting that you raised that. In the notes that I sent you, which I know you may not have had a chance to see, one of my first note was that Islam is in the news due to those October 7th attacks and the atrocities that they committed. But then you have the pro-Hamas rallies where you have literally US and Western European terrorist cheerleaders for Hamas, which is a terror organization. Isn't this a sign of how their decades-long infiltration plan into our culture, into our universities,
No,
and I've and the money that they've spent, the billions, literally, of dollars they've spent over the last decades, and especially in the last 10 years, has given them massive advantage against us.
yes, that's all certainly true. Unfortunately, so. We have massive amounts, as you say, of funding and sponsorship of chairs and departments of Middle East studies, for example, in many, many United States universities. We could mention Columbia perhaps at the top of that list, and look what's happened there. And a lot of that money, that funding is coming out of the Middle East, in particular Qatar, also Saudi Arabia, and other places too. But the result, as you see, in the wake of the horrific atrocities of October 7, are these students on campuses across the United States. Now, of course, the semester has ended. We're into the summertime now with fewer classes going on campuses. But during
Yes.
the last, semester or two, we had all of these students in schools, universities, on campuses across the United States, um, with an absolute explosion of Jew hatred, of
Yeah.
anti-Semitism. And the thing is that many of these students are not even knowledgeable about what they're supposedly demonstrating for. And when you get some of these, Mike on the campus interviews, right,
Yeah.
asking these students, well, why are you here? What are you demonstrating for? What are you protesting against? Which river is that? What sea is that? They have not a clue. They have
True.
no idea.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, what they do seem to understand is that they hate Jews, and that really is, I think, the result, as you suggested there, Lloyd, of
Yeah.
decades of infiltration, um, of also of bringing in, enrolling a lot of college, university age students, um, who are from the Middle East. Why? Because they pay full tuition.
Of course.
Universities are very eager to enroll students
Mhm.
from these places because they do pay the full tuition, whereas many American students might, be on grants or scholarships, and they're not paying the full tuition. So
Yeah.
all of that infiltration, but in particular, the Muslim Brotherhood front groups. I'll say it again: Muslim Student Association, founded
Yeah.
back in 1964 on the campus of the University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana campus, grown now to a presence on hundreds upon hundreds of university college campuses in the United States, and even on down to the lower levels of high school. And
I've even done to K2, apparently. I did some work once with another group, and yeah, perhaps I can bring the audience attention to this. I did some research. I did a series called The Arab Lobby because everyone talks about the Israeli lobby. And I decided to look at the Arab lobby, the amount of money that Muslim nations pump into the US. This is the College Foreign Gift Reporting website, ed.gov. So sites.ed.gov/foreign gifts. Now, money of a certain type and of a certain amount has to be reported. So this is probably only at best half of what actually goes into universities. But everyone claims that Israel is using its money to buy whatever it is, to buy influence. But when you look at the amount of money that foreign countries, like for instance, you've got 1,848 Islamic donations. This is 2019 to 2021 figures. And this is 69.7 times more than Israel has spent in universities. So just in that period, Muslims spent 70 times more, right? And you've got here for the top five alone have spent 42.08 times more than Israel. That's over $2.2 billion from Muslim countries. And so you've got China spending uh, up to 2021, I think $680 million. Then you've got Qatar, $1.25 billion sunk into US universities that we know of. And then if you go here, you've got, for instance, the US taxpayer Middle East Studies funding, $258,000 for George Washington University. Then Muslim nations, over $100 million. Israel, which spends money, it seems, in biotech, basically farming technology, only spent in that period $507,000. So where's this money going and what are they buying for this amount of money? And you look at Georgetown, Muslim nations, almost $400 million. So what do you think they're getting for this money? I mean, because is this also why these academics are unwilling to speak out against Islam? They don't want to derail the gravy train.
I think that's a large part of it. As your figures, your data, your research show, that is an enormous influence. Of course it is. And what they get for it, what they have gotten for it, I'm afraid is evident on our college campuses of these last few semesters. And that is an outbreak of absolutely virulent, violent, vicious Jew hatred and anti-Semitism, even though the students themselves are utterly clueless of the geography, the history, the culture, or Islam itself.
In South Africa, we had the ANC take over the government. Now, the ANC is, few people are aware, but actually a communist organization. And they utilized a strategy which was first developed under Mao's regime in China. It was called the People's War, where one, you create sympathy for yourself, you paint yourself as the victim, you create sympathy, and then also you do viciously violent acts. You create atrocities to shock and demoralize people while at the same time claiming to be the victim and then justifying those things. I see the very same thing happening which the Palestinians are doing. So this is a communist strategy, and do you see them? So there's this connection from Iran, which is apparently funding, obviously working with Qatar, funding Hamas, oddly enough, because they're Sunni and Shia, but they're allies. But also, I've read a report that says that apparently they're also doing this, Iran is doing this at the bidding of potentially Russia, because this would undermine US support for Ukraine and also give the US, basically its hands would be full and they wouldn't be able to interfere in the plans of Russia and potentially even China. Is there any credibility there?
Well, I mean, certainly there is an axis that we can see already developed among China, Iran, and Russia. That is certainly true. But I think that the initiative, the driving force of the regional, the Middle East upheaval is definitely coming out of the Iranian regime itself. And of course, it supports, backs, funds, arms, trains both Shiites and Sunnis, because within Islam, there is a concept called Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. That's Arabic. Dar al-Islam means the house of Islam, those places already under rule of Islamic law, Shariah. And Dar al-Harb, all those other places in the world that are not yet under the rule of Shariah and which must be conquered. The word Harb in Arabic meaning war, house of war. So there is no barrier to a Shiite regime like Tehran's from working closely with Sunni terror proxies like Hamas, of course, like Al Qaeda and the Taliban in the attacks of 9/11, which we know. There's no problem with that connection, even if at a local level there's all kinds of animosity and antagonism and fighting even among Shiites and Sunnis. But at the macro level, absolutely, it's Dar al-Islam versus Dar al-Harb. So that is a driving force behind what we're seeing both in the Middle East and on our campuses here in the United States. And I think the streets in months to come, even more so. It's something we call, when you mention about Russia, of course, there is a connection, and with Marxism, with communism. And there's a term we use called the red-green axis. Red standing for communism, Marxism, and that would include, of course, Russia and China. And then green, of course, Islam, and in the United States, particularly the Muslim Brotherhood and its various front groups, like we have mentioned, Muslim Student Association and the Students for Justice in Palestine, which is the campus branch of a Muslim Brotherhood front group called the AMP, American Muslims for Palestine, a founding member of the Muslim Brotherhood political umbrella group in the United States, the USCMO. Sorry for all the acronyms. USCMO is United States Council of Muslim Organizations. So that being the green part of that red-green axis. And absolutely, they work together. I'll give you one good example, and we can go from there. But back in January of this year, mid-January 2024, there was a large rally gathering in downtown Washington, D.C. And the website for that and what it was called is March for Gaza, March numeral 4, Gaza.org. And that website is still up. That protest that began at Freedom Plaza on Pennsylvania Avenue in downtown Washington, D.C. turned into a riot that night as darkness fell, and the mobs tried to march on the White House. There had been fencing put up around the perimeter of the White House, and Secret Service were deployed. They did not succeed in breaching that barrier, but they tried to. But if you go to that website, even to this day, I've been at it recently, it's still up. You can go to a tab there, a link there at the website, marchforgaza.org, and you will find a list of the signatory supporters of that event. And there are over 350 named organizations on that list. They're not individual people, they're groups. And they read like a who's who of the Muslim Brotherhood in America and the communist Marxists in America, like RevCom USA, World Workers Party, Liberation Road, Freedom Road Socialist Organization, Young Communists of DC. Groups like these are all listed there. Have a look. But that is the red-green axis, and that's where these come together. Even though we may think of them, and they are, very different ideologies. For the moment, they are working together, collaborating at least, because they both, at this time, want to tear down the United States of America, our constitutional republic.
I brought up here from the the Brill Encyclopedia of Islam. This is volume 13. This is the Dar al-Harb, territories under perpetual threat of a missionary war. Jihad, the classical practice of regarding the territories adjacent to the lands of Islam as the Dar al-Harb, or the house of war, inviting their princes or leaders to adopt Islam under the pain of invasion. And you've got those countries where the Muslim law is not in force. And of course, we can go to the Hidayah, volume 2, which is the Hanafi Sunni Sharia manual, which actually has something like 125 pages of detail on jihad, which I've covered on my channel previously, just so that people realize that Islam is effectively, as Robert Spencer would say, a conquest ideology. And isn't it the case that in Iran you had the communists and the Muslims working together, and then eventually, once they seized power, the Muslims killed the communists and took absolute power?
Yes, in the revolution of 1979, the lead up to it, you had the Communist Party, the Today Party in Iran, also the Fedayeen, and even the Mujahideen-e-Khalq at one time, originally at its founding back in the 1960s, with Marxist inclinations. They are not so today. The Mujahideen-e-Khalq are absolutely not communist today. But at the time, they did all join together to oust the Shah, whom they rightly saw as a dictatorial, autocratic monarch, not democratically elected in any way. Very shortly thereafter, though, in the early 1980s, 1980, when there were supposed to be parliamentary elections held, and Masoud Rajavi, the leader of the Mujahideen-e-Khalq, was campaigning to huge crowds in sports stadiums, and was being received with a lot of support by the Iranian people for those elections. At that point, the Ayatollah at that time, Ruhollah Khomeini, unleashed his newly formed IRGC, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Pasdaran, against them all, and literally just gunned them down in the streets by the tens of thousands. So at that point, it was understood very clearly that, Vilayat-e-Faqih is the ideology of the Iranian regime of the Ayatollah Khomeini, and that means the rule of the jurisprudent, or that is the rule by a Shiite cleric over the country, both in religious terms as well as political, with no opposition brooked. And so I was just looking at my own reference here. I often use the book Reliance of the Traveler.
Right. It's well known on my channel. I have covered that. I've covered that dozens of times. Yeah, but that's an excellent resource.
Yeah, Book of Islamic Law, and I was going to make sure I got the definition right for jihad. And in the book 09.2, page 601, in this book, oops, I'm sorry, back up one page, page 599. 09.0. You've got jihad means to war against non-Muslims, and it's etymologically derived from the word mujahada, signifying warfare to establish the religion.
Here on
It's
the
pretty
screen.
clear. I mean, there's no equivocation about that at all.
Yeah, and I've got it here. So everyone can see this. Links to all of my references are in the description. You can get a PDF copy of this book, so just check the description box. You'll be able to find this there as well. And and also if you go to the Hidayah Volume 2, you'll find that. Hold on, let me actually just bring up the Hidayah Volume 2. So the Hidayah is 2,652 pages of Islamic law. It's possibly the most complex and largest of these. And you'll find here, for instance, if we go to the laws of jihad, they speak here on book 9. This is volume 2, Al-Sir, or the Institutes on the manner of waging war and of plunder and the division thereof. That's on page 159. And of course, plunder is something that pirates do. One would think it's very odd that a religious legal manual speaks of plunder when, and then of the conquest of infidels and of the jizyat. And if we should go to this, let me just go, I think it's page 160. Let me go to page, let me just find this quickly. And of course, it decides to freeze at right that moment. Okay, there we go. Let me just bring up the institutes. So let's see if I have the correct one. This is it. This is the Hanafi school of fiqh. This is what they call the crown jewel. And they state here within the laws that the Prophet has said, we are directed to make war upon men until such time as they shall confess the Shahada. And of course, they have to embrace the faith, right? Else we will make war. But then they say all sorts of interesting things that, for instance, the people will perceive that they are attacked for the sake of religion and not for the sake of taking property. And on this consideration, it is possible that they may be induced to agree to the call in order to save themselves the troubles of war. And of course, it says, yes, you can kill men, women, or infant children because that which protects them, namely Islam, does not exist in them. It is a call for open genocide to break all sorts of rules of war. Are you familiar with the Hidayah, Claire?
Yes, I am. And actually, I was just looking up a couple of citations from the Quran itself. If we want to go actually to the source, the words of Muhammad, believed to be the words of Allah transmitted through Muhammad.
Yeah.
And of course, we can look at verse Surah 9:29. Fight those who believe not in Allah nor the last day, nor hold that forbidden which hath been forbidden by Allah and his apostle, nor acknowledge the religion of truth, even if they are people of the book, that being Christians and Jews, until they pay the jizya, the blood tax, with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. So, I mean, it's very clearly laid out. There's, not too many ways to interpret those words.
Just a final point, then I'll come back to you. This is the Constitution of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and it has an opening preamble that says that in the formation and equipping of the country's defense forces, attention must be paid to the faith and ideology as basic criteria. And it says that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps doesn't only protect the borders of Iran, but they must export, right? They must fulfill the ideological mission of jihad in Allah's way, extending the sovereignty of the Shariah throughout the world. And it says here, prepare against them whatever force you can muster, strings of horses, striking fear into the enemy of Allah. That's Quran 860. So they actually call, and if you read further through their constitution, it actually states that they will ally with other revolutionary forces around the world to overthrow Western governments.
Yeah, and to that point, I think it's very useful to note that on the round green logo or shield of the Muslim Brotherhood, at the very bottom, along the bottom curve of that logo, is the word wa'idu. And that word is the first word of that Quranic verse you just cited, 860. It means prepare or make ready. In other words, a reference to 860.
Wow.
Make
Did
ready
not
your
know that.
forces to the utmost of your ability, including steeds of war, to strike terror into the hearts of the enemy. That right there gets to your Sunni Shiite alliance, and why there is no barrier at the doctrinal level to them working together. Again, the macro level, Dar al-Islam versus Dar al-Harb. There we go. Yeah, at the bottom there, you can see
I did
underneath
not
the
know
crossed
that.
swords, what would do
Wow.
means prepare or make ready. And it is the first word of that verse that you just quoted, 860 from the Quran.
Wow. I did
And,
not
and
know that.
included in, of course, as you just said, the preamble to the Iranian Constitution of 1979.
Claire, I mean, this is frightening. These people have literally billions of dollars. They have hundreds of thousands of people infiltrated across the West, inside our institutions. They clearly influence and intimidate or buy or threaten or whatever the case might be. Just what can we do? What are we doing? What is effective? And what can we as individuals do? What can I do? What can my audience do?
Well, beginning at the national level, in particular after 9/11, I think the United States and our Western allies, NATO and others, have proven pretty effective at countering violent terror, violent jihad, going after Al Qaeda, of course, the Taliban. Um, by the way, though, never ever holding the Iranian regime responsible for its role and its terror proxy Hezbollah's role in 9/11. But put that aside, pretty good at countering the violent terror of Islamic Jihad. But what we're not very good at is countering what I think is an even more insidious and ultimately dangerous critical threat, and that is subversion. Um, the Islamic forces of the world, be it Iran, be it the Muslim Brotherhood, are very good at subversion. And there's no law in the United States Criminal Code against subversion per se. There are laws against material support to terrorism, which you might call this, laws certainly against treason. But there's no law per se against subversion, and we're not very good at it. So what we need to do is get better at it, to recognize subversive infiltration and co-option when it happens, be it on the university campuses or within the ranks of our own government, think tanks, academia, throughout academia. But pay more attention to subversion than to terrorism, which I think has pretty much outlived its usefulness as a word anyway. It's become sort of an epithet, an all-purpose default epithet for bad guys. But I think we need to pay more attention to the subversive element.
Subversive elements. On that point, are, are modern hate speech laws just Sharia slander and blasphemy laws repackaged? Because, yep,
Certainly part of it is. Yes, absolutely part of that is. Some years ago, some friends, colleagues, and I were attending the meetings of the OSCE, Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe, held annually in Warsaw, Poland. And there we made it our purpose, our mission, in particular, to stand up for the rights of free speech and to champion free speech and more free speech as any kind of a counter to what might be called hate speech. That what others were calling hate speech ought to be completely permitted, unless you're talking about immediate incitement to violence, and that is against the United States law. But aside from that, the counter to quote unquote hate speech is more speech that counters whatever is hateful in those other messages.
something I've discovered is that I did a series some time ago on my channel on Aristotelian logic, and on rules of evidence and how we know something is true. And I covered Thomas Aquinas extensively and sort of different philosophies around that. And what I do find is that I mean there has been a decline apparently in Western education, especially in the U.S. So now you've got people who are intellectually not as well founded as they should be in the arts, in education, in understanding, and so you can make a very logical argument. You can provide evidence, but they don't care about that. They're so ideologically blinded. How do we? But yet, I know that you've also these arguments. I had a paper given to me by a friend who had a paper written, and it was on the fact that these ideologies are very often absolutist. There's no questioning of the ideology of the ideas, but these ideas are so laughable when you really look at them. They must silence everything. They must censor everything, because once the student looks at something else, he the ideas are so fragile they'll break because it's so obviously ridiculous. It doesn't hold any water. So
Yeah.
despite that, so your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, universities in the West, the place where the concept of a university was born with the Enlightenment and Western civilization. Western education is supposed to be to not only impart knowledge, be it biology or nuclear physics or what have you, but also to open the minds of students to learning in a lifelong way, to open their minds to questioning, to researching, to intellectual curiosity, right? Now, I'll go back and reference another book for our listeners here. It's called The Naked Communist. It was written in 1958 or published in 1958 by a former FBI agent named W. Cleon Skousen, Skousen. And he had either attended himself, I'm not sure, or talked to people who had attended some of those congressional hearings held earlier in the 1950s, the House on Un-American Activities Committee on the House side, and then, of course, Senator Joseph McCarthy's committee on the Senate side. And from that, he put together his understanding in this book about communism and its influence, its infiltration, its co-option of academia in the United States. But I'll call particular attention to chapter 13. The name of that chapter is The 45 Goals of Communism Today, meaning 1958 when the book was published, right? And I won't go through all 45, I promise. But number 17 really catches my attention in the subject we're talking about right here, Lloyd. And number 17 says, get control of the curriculum, get control of the teachers' associations, meaning, academia at the professor level, the university level, and get control of the curriculum in the schools. And the goals of communism, this one and the others listed in that chapter, are what the author W. Cleon Skousen took away from those hearings in our U.S. Congress earlier 1950s. Again, I don't know, 52, 53 in there, where communists and former communists like Bella Dodd, for example, Whittaker Chambers eventually, testified as witnesses to what were the goals of communism, the 45 goals of communism today, to destroy our constitutional republic from within. And that's why I point out to your question, number 17 in particular, because it gets at exactly what's been going on over all these decades since, well, at least the 1950s, certainly since the 1960s, I would say, and that's 80 something years. I'm sorry, 60, I can't do math in my head.
60 years, 60 years, yeah.
60 something years, that they have, I would say, succeeded in large measure in gaining control of our academia, not just from, the Frankfurt School that arrived at Columbia University in the 20s and 30s of the last century, but on down and spread across academia in America and on down to the lower levels again, high school and even middle school and
And
below.
this is what those 50 Islamic nations in the OIC are doing in the US and Europe. They are also pumping
Yes.
millions of dollars, billions of dollars into university, schools, even kindergartens now,
Yes.
making textbooks that talk about Islam as a religion of peace. And
Mm-hmm.
on that point, how did the Muslim Brotherhood convince George Bush to say those words? I mean, those are some of the most insidious words ever spoken.
Yeah, there's that photo of President George W. Bush standing in the great big Islamic Center of Northwest Washington, D.C., up on Massachusetts Avenue. And if you look at the photo, he is surrounded, backing him, surrounding him, behind him are some of the top members of the Muslim Brotherhood in America, to include just off of his left shoulder, Nihad Awad, the executive director
Yes.
of CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations, which is the U.S. branch of Hamas itself, the Gaza branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. So how did that happen? It goes
This
back
photo, that
further
one, there we go.
than George W. Bush. There we go. You see right behind him with
Here,
the
sorry, let me just, there we go, yeah.
yeah, just behind him there. And that's Nihad Awad. But this began long before President Bush. In fact, there's another photo that's online that can be found from, I think it's the year 1952, if I remember right. And this would be during the presidency of Dwight D. Eisenhower. And the photo is an old black and white photo taken in the Oval Office with President Eisenhower and a delegation that had arrived from Egypt. And it was headed by Syed Ramadan. Who was Syed Ramadan? The son-in-law of the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, Hassan al-Banna, and a delegation with him. And they had come, I think, the leading edge. There you go. That's it. Yeah. That is the leading edge right there of the. You see, yeah, that one wearing
he's dressed
the
like the Grand
cap.
Mufti of Jerusalem.
Right, and the white cap, it's got a red. There's no color in the photo, but white cap with a red center on the crown. That is the cap worn by graduates of Al Azhar University, the #1 top Islamic university in the Sunni world for 1,000 years. But in any case, that was the leading edge of the Muslim Brotherhood in America. That's where it started. It didn't start with George W. Bush and then move on forward.
Is this appeasement?
Well, it is, but it's also for lack of knowledge. I mean, I know that George W. Bush would not have embraced what the Muslim Brotherhood stands for, jihad, warfare in the name of Islam, if he actually knew about that. But he did not know about that because any of those who could have informed him were blocked from accessing him or any other president.
Is this due to political correctness at the CIA, the FBI, State Department, and so on?
Well, I mean, it's yes, but even more than that, it is the infiltration of Muslim Brotherhood. They're very good at this, front groups, into every level of the U.S. government, be it federal, state, or local, at every level. And for those who, I mean, everybody doesn't have time to spend, umpteen hours pouring through books of Islamic law. They just don't. And I get that, but it is for that lack of knowledge that, errors like this are made. And you go back even to the Clinton administration that preceded George W. Bush, back in the 1990s. And whom did he bring for photo ops to the White House with him and with, his vice president? You have Abdurrahman al-Amoudi. Well, who was Abdurrahman al-Amoudi? A figure affiliated very closely with the Muslim Brotherhood, who also was named by the Clinton administration to, for the first time, establish and set up a Muslim clergy within the U.S. Armed Forces, if you can imagine, and of course within the U.S. Bureau of Prisons as well, to do some more dawah there. So this precedes George W. Bush. He didn't have a chance.
So unfortunate. That is incredibly unfortunate. And then we've got extensive. We've got Huma Abedin, who her parents are part of a Muslim Brotherhood front. They worked in the same office as a Saudi, um,
Mm-hmm.
as a Saudi group, Goodge Street in London. I think it was 46 Goodge Street in London, and she had direct access to Hillary Clinton's phone. She had
Yeah.
very intimate access to her contacts, and she's apparently involved with the data theft that happened with the Awan brothers. Data was sent to Pakistan. There's some evidence there, and so these people have gained trust. And also I think in the West we try to be inclusive and accepting, and we lower our guard unnecessarily, and yeah, we let the enemies in, and we give them too much trust. So this has been going on through both Democrat and Republican administrations. Then this
Yes, I
unwitting
mean,
alliance or witting alliance.
we can't point the finger at one or the other, more responsible for this than the other. No. But yeah, I mean, this is all aside from the fact that, as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton had that private server, in her, I don't know what it was, basement or
Yeah,
bathroom or
basement
someplace,
bathroom.
that was completely accessible by, every adversary in
Foreign
the
actors,
entire world.
by foreign actors. I should mention there was very close ties with the Muslim world, especially Saudi Arabia and the Bush family, with Bandar Bush, for instance. And the Bush
Yes,
family earned
yes,
at
yes.
least $1.47 billion. I mean, money, yeah, you know,
Well, I mean, here's the thing. He was the um, ambassador to the United States during the Bush years leading up to 9/11. And there was a very close relationship developed between them, including that, infamous photos of the two of them walking hand in hand.
yeah,
Um, and that had quite an influence on the president, who did not understand. He did not understand what was happening, and there was no one around him at that time who was permitted to be around him to tell him otherwise. And all the Prince Bandar bin Sultan, uh,
yeah,
the ambassador, um, all of those advisors, who formerly had actually been advising top levels of the United States government, including National Security Council and the Pentagon, people like Steve Coughlin, people like Robert Spencer, people like Bill Warner, Bill Gothrop, on and on, had been purged. I think earlier on you mentioned, the great purge, as we call it, of the language uh,
yes,
in federal documents and papers and reports and so forth, which took place maybe, what was it, 2011, 12, in that time period, but it predates that by quite a bit. And so, these advisors who would have tried to, provide accurate information about the adversaries that we face, including the Muslim Brotherhood, had been purged. There was nobody else left around inside the U.S. government. And I think that goes from that time, 9/11 period, forward till the current day, and all the presidents in between.
we spoke earlier about what we can do as individuals. I did some research sometime. Now, there's a lot of bad science out there, but there's one experiment that has been replicated reliably, and this is the Ash conformity experiments. And in the experiment, they would have actors or students who were in on the game, and they would have a group, and then someone would be introduced to the group, and then have, let's say, a bunny, a horse, and a chicken on blackboard or something, or three lines of different lengths. And they'd point at the horse and say, "That's a chicken," and everyone in the class would agree. And then the new guy goes, "No, that's a horse." And eventually, it showed how peer pressure, how the desire not to offend, and would eventually cause them to deny the evidence of their eyes, and they would say that yeah, that horse is a chicken. That's a
Yeah,
chicken
I
for
mean, this is
sure.
1984, isn't it? 2 + 2 = 5.
But yeah, but then they also then looked at how do we, and then on the flip side of that, what they showed was that if one person, just one, would say, but hold on, no, no, that is a horse, that is a chicken, that is a bunny. Please don't try this. That is a horse. You're not going to convince me otherwise. They found that the indoctrination fell, the impact of the indoctrination or the propaganda on the rest of the group was impacted by 80%. The effectiveness dropped by 80% across the rest of the group. And significant numbers within the group would actually wake up and snap out of the spell. And they would go, yeah, I've always thought that was a horse. And they would, so the voice of one person is apparently incredibly powerful if you buck the trend, which is why people get silenced, canceled, disappeared. Now, I think in the West, while we're not disappeared, we need to speak. That's what my channel does. That's what I try to do, provide facts, provide references. I have an archive of 2,500 sources linked in the description box where all the sources that I use, all the resources I have, I make publicly available for people to access for themselves. And I provide copious information. So on this point, so what do we do as individuals? I mean, we're up against governments. We're up against anonymous, faceless organizations. We're up against the Borg. We're up against this Hydra. But do you think that one person at home, that little grain of sand, that eventually he can be part of the avalanche?
Absolutely. I mean, and here is where modern technology comes to our aid, right? So we have podcasts like yours that you're putting out, and many other people do the same. And those reach many people. And then each of them, reach more people. And so that I think that's what we need to do. I think maybe we underestimate the common sense of most Americans in any case. And when they hear common sense and they connect that to what's going on in their own lives. Example, inflation was 9.6% or whatever when I took office, says the president. No, it was 1.4%, if I'm getting my numbers right, but thereabouts, right?
Yeah.
And people know this because they go to the grocery store every week and they
Oh
know
yeah.
what's happened to the price of food, or the gas station, and know what's happened to the price of.
Well, the benefit is that children are getting stronger because just 20 years ago, it took 4 men to take home $100 worth of groceries. Now, a boy of 6 can carry the same amount.
Yes, but what is the value of the U.S.
That's a joke.
dollar compared to that time way back when? That's the
Yeah,
problem, right?
I know.
But
No,
to
that was just
your point, individuals can make a difference.
yeah.
People who do speak up, whether it's even in your own family circle of friends, or broader groups. If you join local patriotic groups, that can multiply your voice and theirs and put them together. There are many different patriotic groups, little ones at the very local level. I'm a member of a number. I'll mention one here. I live in Northern Virginia, United States. There's a group called Victory in Virginia. And this is a patriotic group that brings speakers to a monthly dinner at a local little diner. So things like that. Writing, even if you think you don't have a flair for writing, it doesn't matter. Little short op-eds to your local newspaper, even calling in to shows, be it on the radio or be it on TV, that take call-ins, right?
Huh.
All these kinds of things can make a difference, but especially most important, I think, is talking to the children in your family, be they your own children, your grandchildren, nieces, nephews, whomever they may be. Talking to those children, and as parents, making sure you know what's in those school books and that curriculum that communism, Marxism has so directly taken an aim at. Again, number 17, 45 Goals of Communism Today.
I should cover that on my channel.
Know
Thank you
what's
for
being
mentioning
taught to the children. And in a way, this is a little bit of a silver lining, if that's possible, to the SARS-CoV-2 chaos of the last several years. And that is that while parents and kids were both stuck at home, For the first time, maybe in a lot of cases, parents had the chance to look over the kids' shoulders at the laptop on the kitchen table as those kids were going through their remote learning lessons. And parents were astonished, they were outraged, they were angry. And that's when they first started attending, maybe remotely first, later in person, attending school board meetings. This kind of involvement, I think, at the local level means a whole lot more than anything that might be contemplated up on Capitol Hill here in the United States in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, that's so people should get involved at the local level, grassroots level, because often that's also how communists have operated with their what did
Yes.
Saul Alinsky call it? The community organizers. I know a community organizer, a guy called Obama.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very.
Yeah,
I,
it makes a big difference to be involved at the local level. That's what it means to be an educated, informed, and engaged citizen. And oh, by the way, here in the United States, we have elections coming up in November this year, November 5th, for both congressional representatives and president. Vote. Get yourselves registered and vote. It matters. It really matters. No matter what
what
you
is
think,
scary
I'm
is,
only one of how many voters, electorate, vote.
as an African, I'm thinking of going to Mexico, then walking up north, and then voting as well, because because apparently that's how you do things these days. Except I won't be allowed to cross the border because I'll be voting Trump. But so there seems to be certain preferences for certain candidates, shall we say? But yeah, I mean, so isn't this? Yeah, I know it's not really part of the topic, but I mean, this chaos that's ensuing. How many terrorists are coming across the border? I'll tell you a brief story. Here in Poland, I live in Warsaw as well. So if you do come to Warsaw again, I'd love to meet with you one day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was a tour guide here for a time. I know the city very, very well. I know the history extremely well. Um, I was I would walk around with my wife and I would see groups of men. There were typically groups of three, and I would always think of them as a self. I've worked in security and I've worked in the Middle East and I've worked in Africa, and my brain just go bing, threat in the shark in the water, that feeling. And I'd have a look, and always three Middle Eastern men, aged 19 to 22, roughly, short haircuts, the whole bit. And but I don't see them anymore. It's like the Polish government seems to have taken notice and they got rid of these guys. You'd see them driving taxis. I was in Barcelona not that long ago, and there were all of these taxi drivers who are Middle Eastern men or men of Muslim backgrounds. The first thing that occurred to me was this is a courier network. These are not taxi drivers. This is a courier network. They're delivering drugs. They're delivering messages, whatever. This is a very well set up. This is a well organized network. That was my first thought. I could be wrong, but yeah, isn't
Well,
there the threat of these cells doing things in the U.S., pinprick
oh,
attacks, causing
absolutely.
chaos?
We have no doubt that this year is going to be violent and chaotic on the streets of America. The border, our southern border in particular, but the northern border with Canada too, has been wide open since the beginning of the Biden administration back in January of 2021. And even the numbers we know from CBP, that's Customs and Border Protection, numbers that they have compiled of those they have caught on what we call our terror watch list, federal watch list for known named terrorists, is in the hundreds already. Now, just
And 8 were caught just
so
a week
many.
ago.
Yeah, the 8 Tajiks who came across our border and were, I guess, finally rounded up in 3 cities, New York, Philadelphia, and I think it was Los Angeles, the third. Rounded up after having been here, been permitted to come in here, been vetted, thoroughly vetted at the border, finally rounded up and arrested just a week or so ago here in the United States. But Tajiks, who are alleged to have connections to the Islamic State Khorasan. Islamic State Khorasan, of course, is an offshoot of the Middle East founded. Originally, it was called ISIS, Islamic State in Iraq and al-Sham, changed its name from that in June of 2014 to simply Islamic State for the precise reason that it no longer was only in Iraq and al-Sham. Al-Sham means Greater Syria, not the modern day nation state of Syria, but Greater Syria, al-Sham. And that offshoot established in the sort of southeastern corner of Afghanistan near the Pakistan border is one of those examples of its spread out of the Middle East. And that's a group there, Islamic State Khorasan. Khorasan, interesting, by the way, fun fact, is the name of the Persian Empire that at one point stretched as far east as Afghanistan and towards almost to the border of China itself. But that's where they took their name from. Interestingly, right? Persia, Iran,
also
Islamic State Khorasan, and that's they recruit Tajiks in particular.
I have a question. In fact, I have many questions, but on this point, do you think they're waiting for a particular D-Day? Because look, the Muslim Brotherhood has their 100-year plan, which culminates in 2028. You've got the apparently, at which point they look to topple the West, overthrow America. Al-Qaeda had a plan, I think, which was supposed to go active in 2021, but all of these things seem, obviously, what we're seeing, the chaos in the West is coordinated. Now, some of it is you dump in a lot of people that just don't belong, and they just create chaos. So that's unscripted chaos, let's just say. And then there seems to be a lot of coordination. Are they waiting for a D-Day to go live?
I don't think there's necessarily a D-Day per se. I think it's going to be a rather gradual, incrementally expanding chaos across the country on our streets. It began with the university campuses, as we said semesters ago, is now the students' home mostly, will be spilling onto the streets. Conventions coming up in our country this year in, let's see, we have, is it August? Or July and August, the conventions of
the RNC conventions, July 11th.
July, okay, July for the Republican Party and August for the Democrat Party. So the convention's coming up this summer, but I think there will be a gradual and incremental expansion of the chaos on our streets. And part of the reason for that is that, just as you said, there are disparate groups involved that we're talking about, back to the red-green axis, right? And those forces we saw in Washington, D.C., not just in January, but just this past weekend, by the way, again. So again, red Antifa, which of course people may or may not know this, but Antifa is short for the German Antifaschistische Aktion, which is the German original branch in the 1920s and 30s of the Soviet Revolution, Russian Revolution of 1917, and Comintern, Communist International, export of that revolution when they got kicked out of Germany, for the most part, by the rising Nazis of the 1920s and 30s. Where did they come? I mentioned this before. They came to Columbia University. That's where they got their first foothold in America. But Antifa, so Antifa on the streets. You will have all those other communists that I mentioned from that signatory support list of, March for Gaza, right? But then you've also got gang members, very violent gang members, Tren de Aragua out of Venezuela. You've got different other kinds of criminals, traffickers, human traffickers, child traffickers, narco traffickers, the cartels, of course. And jihadis. I mentioned the apprehension of many dozens. I think it's close to 200, if not over by now, at our southern border. Jihadis, actual jihadis on the terror watch list.
But these people coming over with purpose as part of an operation to set up a network and prepare.
Yeah, but what the last group that I really want to get to that network part of it is China. We know that there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of jungle tigers. Jungle tigers is a special operations unit of the People's Liberation Army of China. And reporters like Michael Yan, who've been doing terrific work down in Central America and South, at the Darien Gap in particular, have seen these young, single, military-aged, military-bearing Chinese men who don't come through the ports of entry, even with their handy-dandy CBP apps. This is the app on the cell phone that
Yeah.
lets them get in. They're not doing that. They're coming through all the wide open spaces of our southern border that are left unattended because all of our agents, CBP, Customs Border Protection agents, have been pulled to the ports of entry to process people and do paperwork. That's where they're coming through. We've got thousands and thousands of jungle tigers. We know this inside the United States right now. In addition to that, we've got a whole network of not just the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C., consulates in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. We've also got networks of what they call, or formerly called, secret police stations, Chinese police stations across the United States. They are not diplomatic facilities in any way, shape, or form. And another category of what they call special service stations, China, again, not diplomatic facilities. They're all over the United States, at least 10 or a dozen of them. Okay. And we now know that the Chinese have taken over the old Soviet listening post on Cuba at Lourdes. And more recently, we had news of this a year or maybe two ago, that the Chinese have set up joint military training programs with the Cuban military. Okay, where better for a command and control post for the chaos that's to come, that's to be unleashed and coordinated, just as you say, in the United States, at least by the Chinese part of it, than Cuba. And now, of course, we've got the visit of this flotilla of Russian warships, including a nuclear-powered submarine to Cuba. But all of it's coming together.
So look, I know that demoralization, frustration, to create demoralization, to create a sense of
Yuri Bezmenov.
Sorry?
Yuri
Yeah.
Bezmenov.
So part of the process is that they want you to feel demoralized. They want you to feel that you are powerless. And this is part of the process so that you don't do anything, you don't take action, you feel isolated. So obviously we have to do the opposite of that. You need to feel motivated. You need to feel that you won't stop fighting, that you will organize, that you will push back, that you can prevail. So what are things that we can do to make sure that we maintain that spirit?
Well, again, I go back to the local level because I think that is where citizen participation is most important in the civic process, but also in collaboration and support of our local law enforcement. And here I'm going to mention what we have in the United States at our county level. And there, I think it's well over 3,000 counties in the United States. Within a county, the highest, most senior law enforcement official is the sheriff. In most cases in the United States, not every case, but most cases, they're elected. They stand for election. They're elected by the people of that county. And it's at that level, I think, that the preparation must take place, most especially for the chaos that is to come on our streets this year. I'll mention that in another 1-2 weeks, the last week of June this year, there will be the annual meeting of the Sheriff's Association of the United States held in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I'll be presenting to them as well as many others. And this would be an opportunity to provide input, provide support, backing, but also information to the sheriffs of America, to alert them in particular to what is the red-green axis. Do they know what jungle tigers are? And to
what kind of training have the jungle tigers received?
I want them to think about establishing linkages and cooperation between the citizens of their county and the law enforcement. So I'm sorry, what did you say?
Sorry, what kind of, just briefly, what kind of training have the Jungle Tigers received? What is their
They're
purpose?
special operations. They're the 75th Special Operations Battalion of the People's Liberation Army. They have the same kind of special operations training that our SEALs or Delta in the United States might have, or
Tier 1.
Special Forces, Green Berets might have. And that would include how to operate in all kinds of terrain, be it naval, be it mountainous, be it cold weather, be it desert, all of the above, as well as, weapons training, and, specific training for potential targets in the United States. I don't want to give people any ideas, but I'm sure they've got plenty of them their own already. And I would name
they would be trained in demolitions and
our civilian electric grid, for example.
Yeah, so they'd be trained in demolitions and destruction of critical points, like you say, electrical grid, anything that they can destroy to cause chaos and disruption.
Yes.
A brief story. When I was working in the Middle East, I was working in national defense, consulting at a government level, military, law enforcement, and border security. And when the Bataclan happened, I decided to take a course in counterterrorism through Leiden University online. And I was literally the only person in the class that had any field experience. In fact, I was literally the only person that technically belonged there. Everyone else was literally architecture students, art students, and housewives who were constantly policing the forum for someone saying naughty words. And when Raqqa fell, for a temporary period, I had access to a cache of documents from the imam that worked there. That they released his cache of documents of his books. Previously, they were behind paywalls, and I had access to it. And I started posting these, and that's when I started to really study the Shariah. I learned about what they were learning. It was standard Sunni doctrine. It wasn't anything weird, wasn't anything strange. It was just normal, common or garden variety Sunni Islam. And they had the Reliance, and they had the Hidayah, and they had other books. And I started to read these things. I've now got dozens of these manuals, and I've read them. And when I started posting this stuff on the counterterrorism forum, after a very short period, I got warned and I got banned. Once I posted stuff from the Reliance, I got banned. And what happened is the dean of the counterterrorism unit insisted that the Muslim Brotherhood is a peaceful organization with zero ties, zero history of terrorism, of being an incubator for terror, of being a sponsor of terror, they were just the loveliest, warmest, fuzziest, wonderful group you've ever met. And he refused to entertain any discussion on Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization. And also, I was vilified, I was attacked, and you had housewives, art students, and people doing geography who were telling me how I was wrong about the Middle East. And these people were there specifically to police the forum, to not allow. You could talk about Christian terrorism all you wanted, Buddhist terrorism. You could knock yourself out. You start talking about jihad, and you got shut down in moments.
Wow. Well, I would say that at least in terms of the United States, the Muslim Brotherhood is not a terror organization, has never, ever committed an act of terror, which is defined as bodily harm or death of a human being, a person, against Americans, ever. But
did Al Capone kill anyone, or because
going back to what I said before, what they do is far more dangerous than mere terrorism, and that is subversion. They are providing, as witnessed in our Holy Land Foundation material support to terrorism trial concluded in 2008 in Texas, the state of Texas, because that organization, the Holy Land Foundation, had been providing millions of dollars sent over to Hamas in Gaza. And Hamas, of course, is on the United States foreign terrorist organization list. So what I would say, though, is that material support to terrorism is what the Brotherhood does. Subversion is what the Muslim Brotherhood does. And that is way more critical and dangerous to understand than mere terrorism.
Few people realize that Hamas is a wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. In their original 1984 charter, it states the Muslim Brotherhood, that Hamas is a wing of the Muslim Brotherhood in the East.
87. Yeah,
Yeah, so they are Muslim Brotherhood.
Yeah.
So the Muslim Brotherhood can commit violence through its proxies
Well, but
without
you
directly being
can't go
guilty.
up and down the org chart like that. Each organization has to stand alone,
All
and
right.
you don't impute the crimes of the parent to the org chart, box below, unless they themselves actually do that.
Okay. So the Muslim Brotherhood founds these organizations, it creates these organizations, and these organizations then do they would then act in accordance with the will of the Muslim Brotherhood, in a sense, without being directly
Well, they share the
under
same
the orders of.
ideology, of course, the same doctrine, the same canonical sources. Absolutely.
Um, what is the role of Hajj Amin al-Husseini? Now, something I came across in history, um, the Hess brothers, I think Rudolf Hess and I think his brother Albert were born in Alexandria in Egypt. They had ties to Egypt, and they founded in 1930, prior to the founding of the Muslim Brotherhood, certain German Nazi organizations. No, after Muslim Brotherhood was founded, 1928. So I
That's right.
believe in the 1930s, the Hess brothers founded a certain movements in Egypt, which were inspired by the Nazis, and they were there to continue the Nazi sort of policies and ideology. I read the notes recently, so it's not fresh in my mind. I've just recently come across this. I haven't had a deep chance to study it. But there's the connection to Hajj Amin al-Husseini, who's connected to the Muslim Brotherhood, and he inspired and influenced various people in Islamic terror. So you've still got this. So there is this connection from the Nazis to these other groups that were founded in Egypt, and Hajj Amin al-Husseini, and now Islamic terror. Is that
Well,
correct?
yes, but I would begin this by noting that Islam comes first, like 1400 years ago, and anything that flows after that is from Islam. That the Nazis teamed up with Haji Amin Husseini um, is because he was the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, so appointed as it was by the British. And it is said that he was perhaps an uncle or a relative, in any case, a mentor to Yasser Arafat, who himself was born in Cairo, Egypt. But of course, yes, during World War II, um, Haji Amin al Husseini spent a good deal of time in Berlin at the top inner circles of the Nazi Party with Hitler himself, and producing radio shows that were beamed back into the Middle East to try to rouse up the local Arab Muslims there to fight against, to take on and slaughter even more Jews. And indeed, if you remember the movie, George W. Patton, American general, right? And it was Patton who stopped the eastward movement, and Montgomery. I shouldn't leave out British General Montgomery. I shouldn't leave him out. Montgomery, but they stopped the eastern movement march of the German army at the Battle of Alamein in 1942, which was intended to link up with other forces further to the east, and including among the Jewish population of what is today Israel. Not link up with them, but link up to slaughter them, to kill them. And it was only because of that battle that Patton and Montgomery won, and they stopped Rommel and the tank advance eastward in 1942 at the Battle of Alamein, that didn't happen.
There's things in history that we're just not aware of. I don't know how much time you've got. I know you've got another appointment
Yeah,
coming up soon.
I do.
So I know we're limited time. So perhaps I can do one or two last questions because I know you're on the time limit. I came across this some time ago. I did these talks on my channel. So Mahmoud al-Abbas was a KGB spy. Then you've got ties to you just mentioned Yasser Arafat, who also seems to have been involved with the Soviets, and he was also some sort of
Yes.
Soviet puppet.
Yes.
And so there clearly is a very strong, and also they became billionaires. You've got poor individuals, and then how do these guys become utter billionaires?
Yeah.
So, and so just tell us briefly about Yeah,
Right.
about these connections and the Russians, what they're doing, and just your thoughts on this, because you know far more
Yeah.
than I do about this topic.
So going back into the Soviet era, Yevgeny Primakov was for a time the foreign minister, but he was also KGB chief. And he led the Soviet program, method, penetration of the Middle East to co-opt Middle East Arab Muslim terror groups like the PLO, like with Yasser Arafat. And the training that was provided under the KGB's auspices took place in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon in
Been there.
the late 60s, early 70s. And it was there that for the first time, that Sunni terror groups like the Muslim Brotherhood out of Egypt, where they have committed terror attacks, Muslim Brotherhood followers, but also interestingly, a PFLP, the George Chabad, group, but also interestingly, at that time, the followers of the exiled Ayatollah Khomeini. Ayatollah Khomeini had been exiled by the Shah of Iran in 1962 to Iraq. But his followers were fanatic about, making sure that at some point they would come to power under his auspices. And Khomeini would send out these at that time, little cassette tapes with his sermons on them. So, but the Bekaa Valley, under the KGB, under Yevgeny Primakov, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, is where these people came together. Abdullah Azzam, whom we might remember, Muslim Brotherhood, of course, to Afghanistan, and eventually becomes known as, I guess, the godfather or something like that of Osama bin Laden, right? But so you've got this mix of the Sunnis and the Shiites coming together for the first time, I think, in any organized training way, under the KGB's auspices in the Bekaa Valley. And that's where 9/11 began, honestly. That's where it started. You had, again, Abdullah Azzam there. You had others from the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, Muslim Brotherhood. And you had Khomeini's followers, the fanatic Shiite followers of Khomeini, then in exile. And they trained together. They went off many of them, to Afghanistan. But later, we have to talk about that at some point, joined together. They joined together, as a matter of fact, after the war in Afghanistan in 1990 in Khartoum, Sudan. Jihad Jamboree, I call it, when they all came together in another formal way, not necessarily at that point with Soviet Russian backing, but the beginning of the planning for 9/11. One more thing I should mention, and that is that at the top levels of the Iranian regime, for example, the supreme leader today, who is the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, studied at Patrice Lumumba University, graduated from Patrice Lumumba University in Moscow. Today it's called Friendship University, I think. But then it was called Patrice Lumumba. And others of the top levels of the Iranian regime, both clerical and military, studied and graduated from that university in Moscow, which was known among us. We used to call it KGB Tech because they trolled for recruits. That university gave university scholarships to third world students who otherwise might not have afforded a university education. And they brought them from Africa and Asia and Latin America and the Middle East. And of course, then many of them were recruited to go back home and be the agents of Moscow from that point forward.
Nelson Mandela was trained here in Moscow. Our previous president was trained here in Warsaw. Nelson Mandela in Warsaw. Our previous president was trained in Moscow, and others were trained in China, Vietnam, and others.
Lots of scholarships were handed out, but there was a purpose to that.
I have a question. One, I know because time is running, so I try not to go too long on my channel. So final question then, perhaps. Two questions. One, very brief answers. One, I've I've got a friend who, an acquaintance from the channel. He's a student at university in South Africa. Communism is rife there. They have these communist organizations, communist propaganda that seems to be fostered and aided and abetted by the administration. They're forced to go through this, like the DEI training. They're forced to do it. They can't say no to it, and it's everywhere. What can he do? What can he do? Now, he knows that this is all bogus, but what can he do in his capacity?
Well, I mean, if he has to take the course, he has to, pass and get a good grade, and he has to graduate, right? But what he can do is maintain his own independence of thought, and he can talk with his friends somewhere else, not in the classroom.
Thank you. And also, finally, then, does exposing the Sharia, as opposed to people go to the Quran and they go in circles because you've got abrogations in the Quran and you've got someone says, well, the Quran says you must have ice cream. And someone says, no, that the Quran does not say to have ice cream. It says to have walnuts. That's actually what you're misinterpreting. You don't speak Arabic, right? So shall we rather, the Sharia is blunt. It is unambiguous. It is really clear. Shall we rather focus on that? And exposing the links of Hamas and Palestine to the Nazis and to the communists, is that a more fruitful direction to
I think all
expose
of the
these
above. I wouldn't exclude any one of those. I think they're all useful, and it may also depend on the audience to which you're speaking. So depending on those people's background, understanding, they're already, the knowledge they already have, you might want to expand further on one or the other of those. There's no reason to exclude any of the above, time permitting, of course.
Thank you. No, that's fantastic. I should end it here. I know that you have another appointment, and I try not to go too long. It's actually gone longer than I anticipated, but thank you. This has been incredible. Too much to take in all at once. I'll have to rewatch and go research. And thank you. Would you be willing to come back in the future and discuss more of this? Because I'm sure this is going to excite a lot of discussion
Yeah,
with
sure.
my
Thank you
audience.
so much for having me, Lloyd. And I absolutely would be glad to come back on a future show with you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to the audience. And until next time, God bless.
Thank you.